I was fortunate enough to be born into a prosperous family, so there was little need for modesty in our wealth. My father eventually rose to the position of general director at a metallurgical plant, while my mother dedicated her entire career to medicine. I excelled in school, earning a gold medal, and smoothly gained admission to the Machine Building Institute. Alongside my studies, I pursued music by completing a variety program at a music college through correspondence, and developed a strong proficiency in playing the guitar. To put it modestly, I played exceptionally well. In fact, exceptionally well. I composed music, wrote lyrics, and performed in an ensemble at dances, both within my institute and at city events. At one point, I found myself torn between pursuing a career in music or engineering. During my third year of college, some musician acquaintances invited me to perform at a dance in the city park. Since I was on vacation, I gladly accepted. Playing music provided an enjoyable way to pass the time while also earning some extra money. I rehearsed with them for a couple of days, and by the weekend, I had mastered the entire dance routine. Then one warm summer evening, everything changed. I caught sight of her and instantly vanished into thin air. She was a tall, slender blonde with captivating brown eyes. Despite her fair hair, she exuded intelligence. At least, that's how I perceived her right away. Having lived a rather eventful life, despite being in my 20s, and having acquired a fair amount of experience with alcohol and the fairer sex, or so I thought, I must admit I had not encountered anyone like her before. Not that there was anything wrong with me, quite the opposite. I inherited my father's good looks, as my mother used to say, although my father believed the opposite. However, my interactions with girls had been limited thus far, and the butterflies of romance had mostly eluded me. But then, she appeared and disappeared just as quickly. At the dance, the femme fatale blonde arrived with her friends, and just as swiftly left without a partner. That gave me a glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, while I was wallowing in self-pity, my colleague in the ensemble, Dima, who stood at a mere 1.5 meters tall, had the audacity to ask this charming girl to dance a couple of times. And that was it. She became his girlfriend. Looking back, I find it amusing, but back then, it was an utter tragedy for me. The summer whizzed by in a flash, and classes resumed at the institute. During one of our rehearsals, my friend Dima surprised us by bringing along the same girl. Natasha, he announced, introducing her to our group. This is my bride. We got married today. Congratulations and pats on the back ensued for Dima, and even Natasha blushed charmingly, overwhelmed by the attention. Her embarrassment was so endearing that I couldn't bear it and excused myself, leaving the rehearsal room. The music started, and Dima and Natasha only danced to slow songs, inseparable throughout the evening. I played solely for her. As the night drew to a close, we performed our final dance. Upon my request, we played Harry Moore's Still Got the Blues. It was a performance unlike any other I had ever given. My guitar cried out, lamenting, singing with a yearning for my beloved, and I thought Natasha could sense it. Several times, she looked at me intently from behind her bow's shoulder. But it was all in vain, and so was my hope. Unexpectedly, Natasha and Dima invited me and a couple of other guys to join them for a celebration. We agreed to gather at Natasha's place. Hopping into a cab, we made our way to the suburban neighborhood where she lived. On the journey, it became clear to all of us that one bottle of cognac would not suffice, prompting Dima and his friends to rush into a convenience store. Meanwhile, Natasha and I were entrusted with setting up the table. Her apartment was on the 7th floor, and as luck would have it, the elevator was out of order, leaving us with no choice but to climb the stairs. Natasha walked ahead, and I followed 2 steps behind. When we reached the 5th floor, I was counting. I knew it was now or never. Natasha, I called out. She halted and turned to face me. Yura? Natasha, I pressed on. You can think whatever you like of me, but I love you. I've loved you ever since I laid eyes on you at the summer park dance. She stared at me in silence as we stood in the dimly lit entryway, her eyes hidden from my view. Frustration welled up inside me as I questioned why she hadn't spoken or come to greet me. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you come up to meet me?" Her voice resonated like a melodic tune, captivating my senses. "I noticed you too, and I felt..." Her words trailed off, leaving the air heavy with unspoken emotions. We stood in silence, both grappling with our unexpressed feelings. "I'm sorry if I hurt you," I stammered, my words stumbling out as I realized the inadequacy of my belated declaration of love. "Oh, come on, we don't have much time to set the table," Natasha interjected abruptly, turning away and ascending the stairs. The urgency in her voice signaled a shift in focus, leaving little room for the tender moment that had just passed between us. The party progressed swiftly. Nadish's parents arrived, and we began preparing to leave. Dima, in a brusque manner, planted a perfunctory kiss on his bride's cheek, bid farewell to his future father-in-law with a dismissive gesture, and we stepped out into the entryway. "How do you like my girl?" Dima asked, puffing on a cigarette. His question hung in the air, awaiting a response. The others chimed in, offering hollow praise for his choice, but I remained silent, quietly descending the stairs. The conversation didn't sit well with me, and Dima's smug expression only served to heighten my irritation. I strolled homeward, my footsteps heavy with the weight of impending autumn. September was nearing its end, and the trees shed their vibrant attire, leaving a barren landscape in their wake. A golden blizzard swirled through the streets, dancing under the cover of night. The gentle patter of a fine fall rain accompanied my journey. With my collar turned up against the elements, I passed by dimly lit houses, enveloped in a somber aura, fully aware that my chances were slim. A sickening feeling churned in my stomach. Though I had expressed my heartfelt words, it was painfully evident that they held no sway over her. The thought echoed in my mind like a mournful cry, "Too late." The rainy days of autumn dragged on relentlessly, and with each morning, the impending wedding day of Nadisha and her beloved drew nearer. November arrived, its chill lingering in the air. The world around me prepared to commemorate the anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, as the progressive forces rallied in anticipation. Dimka, a friend of mine, extended an invitation to our group of friends for a trendy countryside gathering, complete with mouth-watering shashlik. Natasha, his fiancée, and her friend were also expected to join. I politely declined, citing some personal matters as my excuse. However, on the day of the gathering, an unexpected impulse compelled me to act in a way I had not anticipated. I found myself standing at Nadisha's doorstep, mustering the courage to invite her to a restaurant. I held no expectations of a positive response, so when she unexpectedly agreed, a surge of indescribable happiness overwhelmed me. Hailing a taxi, I hurriedly arranged for it to pick her up at 6 in the evening, and by 7:30, we arrived at our destination. As we approached the restaurant, we were met with a bustling crowd. Every table was occupied, and there were no vacant seats in sight. It was a disastrous turn of events. Nadisha glanced at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Shall we head back home?" she asked. "Not yet," I responded urgently, determined to salvage the evening. I dashed towards the phone booth and dialed my home number, hoping for a lifeline. My father answered on the other end. "Dad, I need your help. We're stranded at the restaurant, and I need a way to get there with the girl," I pleaded, desperation evident in my voice. It seemed that my father effortlessly deciphered my desires just by the tone of my voice. He simply inquired about which restaurant I wanted to visit. 15 minutes later, the receptionist approached us, leaving the doorman in a bewildered state, and cordially invited us inside. Natasha looked at me with surprise, but remained silent. The evening unfolded magnificently. We danced, sipped Soviet champagne, and when the festivities came to a close, I accompanied Nadisha home in a taxi. Ascending to her 7th floor abode, Between the 5th and 6th floors, I mustered the courage to plant my first kiss on her lips. She reciprocated, and we embraced each other passionately, oblivious to the possibility of being discovered. And then she beckoned me to her room. She had a room of her own, and we slipped in quietly, mindful not to disturb her slumbering parents. We continued to kiss for what felt like an eternity, and then she uttered a cryptic phrase, "What will be, will not be." I wondered what she meant by that. Soon after, she began undressing, and everything unfolded as if by fate. The following morning, I managed to slip out of her place without arousing her parents' attention. On the contrary, my own parents had been awake all night, anxiously waiting for my return. However, they chose not to scold me, and instead, my mother was the first to surrender. I was granted forgiveness, and they even served me a cup of coffee. Yet, in my mind, I remained with my beloved, undoubtedly my one and only. Thus, an hour later, I found myself heading back to her residence. As I arrived, her father greeted me at the door. I extended a polite greeting and inquired about Nadisha's whereabouts. He gestured towards the kitchen but invited me to wait in the living room. "She's occupied at the moment. Let's not disturb her," he said. I obediently took a seat on the couch, following the unexpected slam of the door. Dimka, with a flushed face, hastily emerged from the kitchen and swiftly shut the front door without uttering a goodbye. Natasha emerged shortly after, her eyes swollen and red. It was clear that something had transpired. I sensed there was a need for an explanation from Dimka, the frustrated fiancé. Dimka, consumed by distress, made several attempts to win Natasha back, even attempting to involve me in resolving the situation. Unfortunately, his efforts proved futile. 6 months later, Natasha and I decided to marry. The wedding was a beautiful affair, and my parents spared no expense for their only son. A luxurious wedding motorcade, a top-tier restaurant, and a multitude of guests made the occasion truly remarkable. Interestingly, Natasha discovered that my father was a CEO only on the eve of our wedding. Initially, we resided with my parents in a spacious 4-room apartment. It provided ample room for us. 9 months later, our son Jaeger was born. Despite the challenges life threw our way, our love for each other remained unwavering, and over the years, it only grew stronger. I completed my college education and entered the military, while Natasha put her studies at the medical institute on hold and accompanied me with our son. After 8 years of moving from one garrison to another, our daughter came into the world. A year later, the Soviet Union and its army collapsed. I decided to leave the military, and we returned home. Upon our return, my father extended an invitation for me to join him at the factory, while Natasha took care of our children. Jaeger had reached an age where he could attend school, but our daughter Sveta remained under her mother's care. With the assistance of my parents, we were able to purchase an apartment, and our family flourished. Neither Natasha nor I gave each other any reason to doubt our faithfulness and commitment throughout our journey together. Despite my diminishing emotions, I still harbored love for my wife. However, the intensity had waned over time. Life went on until a fateful day when I attended a birthday party without Natasha. Sveta was unwell, so I found myself going alone. The identity of the celebrant escaped me, and it held no significance. As the night progressed, wearied by dancing, I was called upon to sing along with a guitar. A charming young man with an appealing voice captivated the hearts of the women present. I became the center of attention, and a discerning lady wasted no time in luring me into a hasty encounter in the restroom, which continued at her place thereafter. The next morning, while she still slept, I hastily excused myself, concocting a story of excessive drinking and an overnight stay at a friend's house. Absence of a cell phone conveniently helped maintain the deception. Shame engulfed me in the presence of my wife, yet I found myself enticed by the experience itself. From that moment, my thrilling journey through the beds of others began. No, I still loved my wife, and the thought of leaving her never crossed my mind. She was my steadfast support, and I fulfilled my duties as a devoted husband and father at home. The well-being of my family always took precedence. However, outside the familiar confines of home, amidst the chaos of the urban jungle, I transformed into a hunter, a collector of fleeting passions. I embodied the alpha male. Opportunities abounded, attracting divorcees, married women, young and old. I pursued women with the ease of an expert. Over time, a sense of satiation crept in, and I grew selective, no longer engaging with just anyone. I reveled in my conquests among the vulnerable female population, reassuring myself that everything was discreet and beyond my wife's awareness. Establishing long-term connections with my mistresses held no appeal. We indulged in a few rendezvous, bidding farewell afterward. I set a personal rule for myself. The moment slippers and a toothbrush materialized in my mistress's apartment, I promptly made my exit, recognizing the peril of lingering. I could easily become ensnared. This rule served me well. However, as the saying goes, not everything can remain concealed indefinitely. Sooner or later, the truth unveils itself. As time passed, I found myself increasingly caught up in working overtime and going on frequent business trips. Although my wife may have suspected something, she chose to remain silent, and I let myself be carried away by my actions. It wasn't until our 17th year together that I realized how far I had gone. My affair with another woman had been going on for 3 months, but I had reached a point where I was tired of this reckless lifestyle and determined to put an end to my Casanova career. At 37 years old, I held the position of First Deputy General Director and owned a share of the factory, with my father being the owner. Meanwhile, my wife, Natasha, worked as a doctor in a children's polyclinic and had managed to complete medical school. After confessing my affair to my wife, I went to break things off with my mistress. We were sitting in the kitchen, smoking, when the doorbell rang, revealing my wife standing at the doorstep of her apartment. It turned out that my mistress's roommate knew both Natasha and me, and she wasted no time in revealing my infidelity to my wife. Natasha now knew my address, workplace, and the name of my mistress. I couldn't help but feel afraid of the potential scandal that awaited. To my surprise, my mistress was in shock, but Natasha remained remarkably calm. I stammered, trying to explain that things were not as they seemed, but my words fell on deaf ears. Natasha simply stood there, her gaze filled with an overwhelming pain that made me feel as if the ground beneath me was about to give way. Without uttering a word, she turned and walked out of the apartment. In a state of panic, I rushed after her, only to find that she had already disappeared, likely leaving in the cab she had arrived in. 30 minutes later, I arrived home to find the children fast asleep. Natasha sat in the kitchen, her head weighed down by her hands resting on the table. Before her, an empty container of sleeping pills stood as a haunting testament. Without hesitation, I dialed the emergency services, urgently summoning an ambulance. Thankfully, Natasha's life was spared. The doctor informed me that had we waited any longer, the outcome would have been tragically different. Throughout Natasha's time in the intensive care unit, I remained faithfully by her side, offering support and solace. 2 weeks later, she was discharged from the hospital. However, everything had changed. Natasha appeared markedly different, particularly in her gaze. She scarcely spoke to me, only engaging in conversation when necessary. I knew deep down that forgiveness would never be granted. Strangely, my betrayal seemed to have left a visible impact on her physicality. She had lost weight, accentuating her already stunning features. We did not argue or bicker, but she never let me forget my transgressions. Instead, she chose to disregard my presence, rendering me insignificant. The only reason she tolerated my existence was for the sake of our children. Intimacy became a distant memory as we slept in separate rooms. I was willing to go to great lengths to make amends, to redeem myself in her eyes, but Natasha had no interest in such efforts. And so for 5.5 years, we merely coexisted. Our children grew up swiftly. Yegor embarked on his studies at the Academy of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, while Sveta neared the completion of 8th grade. One fateful day, the truth dawned upon me. My wife had found solace in the arms of another. The exact moment of realization eluded me, for it was a subtle transformation in her demeanor that hinted at her newfound love. She appeared distant, her smile carrying a secret only a woman in love could possess. Oh, how well I knew that behavior from my own past experiences. Yet, I refrained from prying or extracting any confessions from her. I had no moral authority to do so, for I myself had been the last to betray and abandon our sacred bond. Instead, I awaited with trepidation the inevitable moment when my wife would depart for another. Then came the night when Natasha, my wife, beseeched me to stay away from home the following day, granting her the opportunity to gather her belongings. She did not disclose the identity of the person for whom she was forsaking our marriage, and I dared not inquire. Natasha made no excuses or apologies, only expressing her desire to sever all ties with me. I had anticipated this moment, steeled myself for the impending loss. I've already informed the children, sparing them the explicit details. I confessed to her. Sveta, our daughter, took the news particularly hard, her heart heavy with sorrow. They no longer wished to share their lives with me, ensuring that I would not be alone in this desolation. Farewells were exchanged, and the resounding echo of the front door's closure marked the departure of my wife. Bereft of her presence, I succumbed to an overwhelming sadness, clenching my teeth tightly into the bedspread to stifle the anguished wails that threatened to escape. Words failed to capture the depths of my anguish. I had single-handedly dismantled everything, shattering not only my wife's life, but also the lives of our children. Most of all, I had shattered my own existence. Life could now be divided into 2 distinct epochs, the before and the after, and this after was no longer a life, but a mere existence. I feigned normalcy, going through the motions of work and engaging in conversations with others, yet oblivious to the world that surrounded me. 6 months lived by in the blink of an eye, and then one day Natasha appeared before me, accompanied by her new husband. He was an ordinary, overweight man, visibly younger than her. They sat together at a cafe table, engrossed in pleasant conversation. As I gazed upon their radiant smiles, a sickening feeling engulfed me. My heart ached and darkness clouded my eyes. Jealousy didn't adequately describe my emotions. No, it was something far more agonizing. I could only observe from the sidelines, slowly withering away in despair and powerlessness. That particular day, I found solace in the bottom of a bottle, drowning my sorrows in a drunken haze. My son returned home and, witnessing my state, swiftly dialed for an ambulance. As I lay in the hospital, Sveta stayed with my mother, who revealed that Natasha's new husband was immensely wealthy. They were planning to whisk her away to Spain, where they had a magnificent oceanfront villa awaiting them in the coming summer. Though my heart was heavy, I could only muster happiness for my wife and her newfound love. Upon my release from the hospital, my existence carried on, albeit in a hollow manner. Whispers reached my ears, hinting at Natasha's imminent divorce proceedings and her preparations to depart with her beloved. Eventually, her lawyer paid me a visit, and without bothering to read the documents, I signed them. I yearned for nothing, except one thing, to be released from this life swiftly. My parents attempted to offer their support, but their efforts fell short. Meanwhile, my children remained by my side. One day, Sveta informed me that our mother would be leaving the next day, and she intended to bid her farewell. Igor, however, vehemently opposed the decision, judging and condemning his mother. Despite my relentless attempts to sway his perspective, he remained resolute. The following morning, an opulent black car pulled up at our doorstep. Stepping out was a graceful and stunning woman, my ex-wife. She embraced our daughter, and together they settled into the backseat as the car pulled away. Oh, the agony I felt was indescribable. Unable to bear it any longer, I hailed a taxi and raced to the airport. The realization sunk in that I would never lay eyes on Natasha again, and all I yearned for was a final glimpse of her. It wasn't the fear of death that plagued me, but rather the fear of living without the person I loved, the person I had pushed away with my own hands. As Natasha bid farewell to her daughter, I observed her closely. The sorrow etched upon her face revealed her reluctance to depart, yet she mustered the strength to force a smile. Sveta wept as they embraced, and with a wave to their daughter, Natasha and her husband proceeded towards the boarding terminal. That was the end of it. Strangely enough, a sense of relief washed over me. I genuinely wished my beloved happiness. Well, my decision was final. I kept my distance from Sveta, entered the cab, and made my way home. Along the journey, I made a stop at a store, purchasing 2 bottles of whiskey. Then, at the drugstore, I procured 2 packs of sleeping pills. That should suffice. I couldn't tell if it was cowardice, but I yearned to depart swiftly so as not to burden the children and parents with my sorrow. Perhaps there was still a remnant of my masculinity left within me. I was acutely aware of my actions and had condemned myself. Silence permeated the house upon my return. It seemed Sveta had yet to arrive. Without bothering to undress, I made my way to the kitchen. I had to act swiftly and leave the apartment in time to spare the child any distress. I retrieved a glass and decided to fortify myself with a drink. But why should I be afraid? I had already opened the bottle and poured a full glass when Natasha's voice echoed behind me. "Will you pour me one?" My mind raced, contemplating whether this was a hallucination, and I turned around. Natasha stood in the doorway, gazing at me with a melancholic smile. "I couldn't do it. It's beyond my strength. I must be a fool, but I still love you. The heart cannot be commanded."